that I could spend an hour talking on each of these topics, but today we're going to spend about an hour talking about both topics. What I hope that you'll leave here with are some good tips on enhancing the CV or cover letters that you've already done before, and feel a little bit more confident in how to approach putting together a good curriculum vitae and cover letter for different kinds of positions. If you have questions as I'm talking, please feel free to raise your hand and hopefully we can clarify for you. Okay? You've got handouts. For those of you that didn't get handouts, I've got somebody in my office bringing some more over shortly. There's copies of the PowerPoint slides as well as some other resources and samples that we might get a chance to look at. So let me move on here. Okay, what is the purpose of the CV and cover letter? Obviously, to persuade an academic search committee to move you into the pile for further consideration. That's your initial introduction to someone for positions. And I assume that most of you are here because you're getting ready for the job search and you want the CV and understand how to write a good cover letter for that purpose. It's certainly something that you want to spend some time thinking about before you even start to write your CV or your cover letter, is to really take stock of your academic preparation over the past several years, that you've been in your doctoral program or master's of doctoral program, whatever your status is. But you want to take stock of a number of these things. You know, kind of take an inventory of internships, fellowships, positions that you've held, TA, GA, research assistant. What kind of research have you done? What kind of service have you done, both on campus and off campus? What affiliations do you have to professional organizations? And I would hope that everyone in this room is a member of at least one professional society in your academic discipline. As a student member or as an affiliate member, that's critical in terms of positioning yourself in the job search. So if you're not a member of a professional organization, talk to people in your department about which ones would be appropriate for you to join, because as many of you know, there's a lot of specialized associations as well. Think about the people that you're going to ask to be references for you. Certainly your people on your committee, if you're working on your dissertation, certainly you need to include your advisor and other people. They should, but you need to be thinking ahead of time about who are the 3 to 5 people that I'm going to be asking to serve as references for me. There's a service that some of you might be using called Interfolio. The Career Development Center had at one time, up until this past year, had a credential service, but now we're recommending that this is a good alternative for managing reference letters electronically. It's being used all over the country. It's very familiar to a lot of institutions. So that might be a way for you to manage letters of recommendation, to make it easy for it to be transmitted electronically and maintained electronically. So get yourself started and really take stock so that you know kind of what the data is that you're going to draw from as you prepare your documents. So we'll start by talking a little bit about the curriculum vitae, of course. How many of you have a curriculum vitae now? Okay. So you're here because you already have one. Want to see how to make it better, I assume? Okay. It's always a work in progress. Your curriculum vitae is never done. It's always a work in progress. You will be constantly writing and editing it throughout your professional life. And you want to make sure that it is up to date every day, so that the minute somebody, you learn about an opportunity or someone wants to nominate you for an award or a position and they ask you for your CV, that you have it. Okay, so it's got to be up to date every minute. And I've, stressed that to people you don't want to say, oh, I'd apply for that job, the deadline's tomorrow, but I don't have my vita up to date. So make sure you're constantly doing that. But what is it? It's a cumulative record of your academic achievements, your preparation, and your qualifications, and it's really focusing on a specific discipline. It's an academic journal per se. We're going to talk about the different sections that you would potentially, or some of these, of course, are evident that you would have on your CV. How you order the sections is really, there's a lot of room for putting things in order depending on what works for you and what you want to emphasize. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But here it lists, of course, the different sections between applicant information, your education, research, teaching experience, presentations, publications, etc. Okay? So let's start to look a little bit at, I mentioned before about how it's used. We're talking primarily about how it's being used for a job search. But look at all these other ways that a vita can represent you. And, someone might ask you to speak at a conference, and they'll want your vita, or they'll want your bio. Someone might want to nominate you for a position. They might want to nominate you for an award. There's lots of different times that your vita is going to come into play when you're applying for grants, etc. Okay. Any questions up until now? Just kind of general? Okay. Certainly you want to know your reader. For every discipline, all of you in the room, I know there's people from every school and college here, I think. The scientists are going to certainly want to have different things emphasized than some people in some of the humanities. So you want to be aware of what some of the nuances are in your particular discipline, and are there certain things and certain formalities and certain standards that are expected in your particular field. So make sure that you're asking faculty member, colleagues in your department to review your vita, as well as asking your peers to review it. Okay. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make, whether this is on a resume or a vita, is they bury information that's critical to the needs of the position, or they neglect to emphasize something that really does matter in terms of your qualifications. So make sure you know the reader, make sure you know your audience and what they might be expecting on your vita. Okay, there's no standard format. In the materials I gave you and you'll see online, there's different ways that you can format it and space it. There's a lot of room for what makes sense. But the critical thing is that you want it to be accurate. You want everything on your vita to be verifiable. There's ways that you can phrase things to make it sound, good, but you don't want to overstate facts. Anything that's on your resume or vita that is misrepresentation certainly is not going to, it's going to get you kicked out of the running for a job, and it also could be grounds for dismissal at some place. So just stick with the facts, don't embellish. The length, again, no established rules. For most people that are starting out, for many of you that are new professionals, a 2-page vita, 3-page vita is probably going to be where you'll be at. But you probably have seen some vitas of some of the people in your department that have been around for a long, long time that have multiple-page vitas. And that tends to be because they've done a lot of publications and presentations. That's what tends to, extend the length of the vita. But how you organize it and how things are emphasized is really going to contribute to the length. Okay? But the most important thing is that you're keying in on the content first. Don't worry about the length. Your first draft is probably going to be longer than what you end up with. Your first draft some things will get edited out. But the first time you put things on paper, just worry about getting the things out of your head onto the paper. Okay? Again, the keys to well-constructed. You use concise language. This isn't writing an academic paper, but you're trying to use phrases that are clear, because the people that are going to be reading your vita initially certainly probably are people in your academic field, but they might include people in human resources or other people that aren't as familiar. So you want to make sure that you're using concise phrases. Don't use, a lot of people just put a course number that they might be teaching, but to someone that's not at Binghamton, they're not going to understand what that course number is. So you might want to put the full name of the course with the course number, and so forth. Be very consistent with how you lay it out with the presentation. Don't switch fonts, don't change your spacing, but present everything in a consistent format. Also, use categories. You can create the categories for your different sections. There's certainly standard labels, but you can look at what you're grouping together and label them based on the theme of what that section is. So make sure you're putting the most important information first. As I mentioned before, you've got a lot of freedom. If teaching is more relevant to this position than research, then you'll put that section before research, but for another position, you might switch the order. And certainly you don't want to make any mistakes on your vita. Proofread it very carefully. This is a writing sample. This represents you to the employer, and you're representing to someone how you approach your work. So if you're careless, that doesn't reflect well on you, okay? Okay, so let's start with, what to include on your resume. Obviously, on your CV. Contact information, most people put it, did we still run out? Yeah. Wow. If we didn't have enough handouts, you could let us know at the end, and we can make sure you get some copies of those, okay? You want to tell people initially who you are, how to find you. Pretty self-explanatory, your contact information. Sometimes people put a lot of phone numbers on their vita, but it might be best if you just put your cell phone number, because that's the way you're always going to be reachable, allegedly. Don't make it too challenging for someone to figure out how to reach you. Sometimes people put their department address on there as well, and your email. But it's not necessary to include personal information like the things that are listed at the bottom. All you need to tell someone is who you are and how they can find you. None of this personal information is lawful information in the United States for an employer to ask if you're married, how old you are, where you were born. And I know in some other countries that's standard information to put on. But here in the United States, an employer can't ask you if you're married, how your health is, etc. If for some reason you'd like to share that information because you think it might promote you as a candidate, I'm not sure how, that's information to provide at the end, okay? But typically, just this information about who you are and how to find you, okay? Make sure that the voicemail message that is on your phone is concise. Now, I know you graduate students are much more mature than undergrads, and the kind of voice messages when you go to call them, there's music, there's a lot of nonsense. It's like, okay, just get to the point and let me leave a message. Same with your email address. Make sure your email address is professional, and I know I don't have to tell you folks that, but I do have to usually tell undergraduate students, don't put cutie pie or that kind of stuff. I don't know that you guys would do that. Okay? Basically, that's pretty self-evident, but I just wanted to review a couple of things about the contact information. And then for I would say pretty much all of you, the next section would be education, obviously. For people that might have graduated years ago, they don't always put education next. Their experience might be more relevant. But for those of you that are in the process of completing a degree, pursuing a degree, education would come next. And you would put in there all your education, starting with the most recent. Every section of your vita should start with current and work back in time. You use reverse chronological order. So you put up, and you use the same consistent way to present it. So first you put Binghamton University, State University of New York. You put information about the degree that you're pursuing in the major and when you expect to complete it. Or when you have completed it. And you can include other information in this section about GPA if you want. You can include the dissertation topic in education. Some people opt to put that in a separate category. You can put the name of your advisor. Put everything that has to do with your highest degree that you've received, you're pursuing first. And then if you have a master's degree that you received somewhere, put that next, bachelor's degree, and so forth. I would put, if you included, if you received any degree from any institution, from a bachelor's degree to a PhD, it's certainly important to list it. You might not put as much about certainly the bachelor's degree as you would about your master's or PhD. You don't have to put a name of a school that you went to just for a short period of time. Okay? What else about that? Honors and awards can be part of the education section, or you might feel that what you have to put in honors and awards warrants it to be in its own category. And the kinds of things that you can include, any kind of academic awards, any types of recognition that you receive, special achievement, any of those kinds of things, research-related, dissertation-supported, and include the department that you might have received this from, an organization that you might have received this from. Not necessary to go back to undergraduate to include honors. At this point, that's information that can be eliminated. Unless there's something, if you graduated in high honors, and Dara, you can tell me what you think about this as a Professor Dara Silverstein over here, Associate Dean of the Graduate School, if you don't know Dara, and also a professor in women's study. I always like to get the professor to check what I'm saying. Undergraduate honors, unless they're really relevant to what you're pursuing now, aren't necessary. Would you say? Okay. Yeah. But put it on if you've had an interest and you did research as an undergrad, and you were involved in doing, you certainly were contributing to a publication or anything like that with a professor. That shows your scholarly pursuits extend back quite a ways, okay? So you want to think about what promotes you and might make you stand out differently from somebody else. Make sense? Okay. Typically, for those of you that are pursuing positions in teaching and education, you would want to emphasize and have a separate section on your teaching experience. And of course, this is where you have an opportunity to talk about the different courses you've taught, any curriculum developments that you've been involved in, some, pedagogy, different types of approaches that you may have used. Rather than just talking about that you held office hours, they know this, that you hold office hours. But, just stick to what the coursework is, what the approach perhaps that you used. Is there a different kind of curriculum? Did you develop a different type of curriculum? Was there service learning involved? What was unique about the courses that you taught? And you can go further than what's on your resume in your cover letter when you talk about the unique needs of the organization. So your resume, your CV, while you want to present a good amount of information about a certain course that you might have taught, don't tell everything about, this isn't writing in paragraphs. This is doing phrases about some of the highlights of that course, rather than going into a teaching philosophical statement. Does that make sense? Okay. But, if they're large lectures, smaller discussions, so you want to give someone an idea of the kinds of, the scope of the experience that you've had in that area. You want to add anything to that, Tara? Yeah,
it's also a good idea to, to a certain extent, based on what jobs you're applying for, to emphasize what you're capable of teaching. If it's an intro course in history, American history, let that detail be known in terms of as you list the courses that you taught.
That's right. That's a good point, too. Okay. Research scholarly activities, the position title, the department, the university, and the location and dates. The dates don't have to be exact, month, date, year, but, give a sense of, was this from January to November, or was this, give month to month, year to month, year, so that, or you could say fall or spring, that kind of thing when you're talking about it. But certainly, if there are, I know a lot of you in Watson, you've got a lot of projects all the time, a lot of the technical things, there's a lot of projects. So do you want to present them all in one category? Are there ways to create subgroups of projects? What are the ones that are, the most noteworthy? Is it necessary? There's a lot of decisions to make as you pick through. That's why I said go back to that inventory you did initially and say, what are the things that I feel are most relevant? What you might end up doing is having more than one version of your CV. And what's the beauty of having it on an electronic document is that you can have a few different versions easily, where you say, well, I'm going to, for this particular position I'm applying for, I'm going to present more about certain experiences than others, because this is really right along with their research interests. So there's a lot of room for you to make decisions about what you want to emphasize and how you want to organize your research. Dara, anything with that?
The only thing as a more general statement, a lot more places are requesting electronic copies of CVs. So you need to make sure that it looks as good as it does in print. Make sure that the columns are right, that dates aren't going to go on to the next line. Talking from experience. But just make sure that your version, your electronic version, is as clean as whatever print copy that you have.
And what's really nice now? I discovered that Word 2007, you can save it as a PDF. Easily. I don't know. Do you know this? I was excited about that, but it's better to send a PDF for that reason.
Right.
So keep that in mind too. PDF your documents before you send them. It really keeps them in the format that you want. Okay. Moving along, I really urge you to have a section where you might present service. And for those of you, I hope that you're engaged in the life of the institution. Certainly everybody is busy with their own studies, but a lot of times when committees are looking to hire someone, they like to see someone that has been involved in things at the department level or the university level. If you're a graduate student representative for a committee, if you're engaged in service both in any professional organization, including just affiliations, that's all information to put on your vita as well. Service, whether it's volunteer work, are you on a board of any kind of organization? Are you involved in any clubs on campus in terms of any leadership capacity? So, because once you get onto the faculty, as I'm sure you're aware, there's expectations about service and expectations about professional engagement. So it's good to show them that you understand that now and that you've been starting to build up that experience base. So if you're a student now and you say, I don't really have any of that right now, talk to someone in your department or advisor about how you might get involved in something. And you can decide what level of time commitment you have. But try and be a little bit visible and engaged beyond, just the academic rigors, right? I look at her. She's my go-to person. Okay. Publications. Many of you may not have had a chance to publish yet, but you might have some things that are under review, are in the progress. are being prepared for publication, certainly include that. And as I said with other sections, where you include this is going to depend. Everything depends on what you've got on your list. And for many new PhDs, there's not a lot published. For some of you, you might have an opportunity to really be a co-author of a lot of things already. So put down your publications, and you want to make sure you're following the standard format of your field. Ask your advisors and people in your department, your other mentors, what the expectations are in terms of presenting that. And yeah, I mentioned about the work submitted for publication. So that's certainly worthy of having on there. Any role that you've played at all would be important to include. Okay. Certainly if you've been an invited lecturer, if you've been asked to do a presentation at some place outside of your teaching, if you were asked to present at a community organization on a topic, any presentations that you've made at a professional conference. How many of you have gone to a professional conference at least once? Okay, good. You want to include, presentations that you've made. And it's also good to list conferences under professional training and development, conferences that you've attended, even if you didn't present, because it shows that you're getting out there, and it's obviously a great way to network. A lot of times people can find out about job opportunities and job leads just by networking. So get yourself out there. Hopefully many of you are gearing up to attend some conferences this winter, spring in your field. So, I hear wonderful stories about people that get leads about a job that hasn't even been advertised yet, because they went up and talked to somebody after their presentation that's doing work that interests them, and that kind of relationship building is really what led them to an opportunity for an interview. Because as you all know, there's a lot of competition out there, and anything that you can do to start to let people that have common interests with you know your interests, and you're a little bit assertive, and you make overtures to the right people in terms of building relationships, that can pay off in the long run. Okay. Certainly, for those of you that have language ability, have a section on languages. This tends to be towards the end of the resume, unless the kind of position that you're seeking, language is a critical qualification. But it's certainly important to mention the languages that you know, reading, speaking, writing. And actually, I meant to put a link on here that it's called that's really good at doing a self-assessment of your language. It's called the Language Roundtable. And I can get that link, because I don't know the link off the top of my head, but I can get that link and I'll post it. I was going to say we could either send it in the survey that you're going to send, because it's a great way to kind of do a self-assessment. A lot of people don't know, well, am I fluent? Am I proficient? What's the difference? Some people say they're fluent in something when they're really not. So this is a way to come up with a good assessment of what is your level of proficiency with a certain language. But I'll get that link for you as well. Then you might create some sections. For those of you that are computer or engineer type people, you're going to have a section where you've got technical skills. You're going to have a section on computer knowledge. For those of you that aren't looking for something in a technical field, you'll probably include a section on, computer, technical skills, software that you know how to use, etc. For the engineer type people, that's going to be early in your resume, because that should probably be on the first page. For those of you that it's less relevant to the discipline, you'd put it later. I mentioned about the professional memberships, affiliations. That's where you just have a list of organizations that you belong to and how long you've been a member. So you would put dates from when to when that you've been a member. But as I said earlier, it's really important to join at least one organization. Okay. And then often, either as an attachment or as the last section on your vita, there'll be a statement about references. Sometimes you'll see a separate page. They'll say references for in your name, and then you'll have 3 to 5 people's names, their title, where they work, all their information, phone number, email. But you want to make sure before you share that you've gotten permission from the person to share their information, and they're okay to serve as a reference. One thing that's, people aren't too, you probably had students that have used your name as a reference and without you knowing it, and then you get a phone call and it's like, gee, I wish they would have told me. So you want to follow that same protocol and make sure you talk to some folks ahead of time about, their willingness to serve as a reference, if you want to include that. Okay. Questions about anything I've said so far? Dara, is there anything that you want to add about the categories or the content that we haven't mentioned yet?
A couple things.
Yeah.
Just quickly on the references. It's a good idea to know, well, obviously know your audience, but also know whether any of the references that you're listing has any kind of dispute intellectually with any of the places to which you're sending the CV, right? You may just do blankets, and that's okay too. Sometimes when you do blanket CVs, you may just want to say available upon request, because as you all know, disciplines, there are some very staked out positions, and if one of your recommenders is someone that represents a particular perspective, it may not be in your best interest to send that person. And hopefully in discussing with whomever it is, they'll say you may not want to send my name to wherever. So that's one. And the other thing, earlier when you were talking about presentations, and again, this depends on I guess the number of presentations you've done, but as you know, it makes a difference whether or not, it was a refereed paper presentation, or were you on a panel, were you discussing, depending on the numbers that you've done, it may make sense to break that out a little bit, because obviously refereed papers are better than, just, everybody being accepted to whatever panel, and having paper presentations is viewed differently than being a panelist, so give that some consideration as well as you craft that part.
Good. Any questions about the sections or any of the kind of categories that we've been talking about? As the slide says here, after your first draft, make sure you show it to people, let people critique it for you, write, edit. You can bring it to the Career Development Center. We have counselors on duty throughout the week, and you can bring it in and we'd be happy to review it also. But when I review a CV, I always ask, have you had anyone in your department look at it too? Because, like I said, there's some nuances and things like that. I mentioned earlier, keep it updated, create new categories, kind of, take stock of how you plan to continue to use it, and so forth. But you want to make sure that you can always give somebody a vita on a moment's notice. Okay? That's what I was going to talk about related to CV. Now, in the packet that you have, there's a few samples, a couple of templates about, how you might, there's a blah, blah, blah one you might have seen, just in terms of how you might structure it. We have some more information on CV writing on our website, as well as a quick reference guide PDF that you can print off as well. I didn't I could be printing up tons and tons of samples, but it's really hard to do that. I wanted to just show a couple of samples. This doesn't mean that this is how I think you should format it, but it's some examples of ways that you might want to think about ordering it and what you might think looks visually appealing. Okay? All right. Let's talk a little bit about cover letters then. How many of you love to write cover letters? It's everybody's worst thing. I think, the more you do, the easier it gets. The cover letter is probably, in my opinion, it's really a critical first step more than the vita, because it's where you introduce yourself to somebody that you want to hire you or want to consider you for a position. So you never send your vita, even if the ad says send your vita to, just assume that you send a cover letter as well. You never just send your vita alone, but you use a cover letter that is a standard business letter, and the cover letter handout that I had available provides kind of what that looks like. But it's, again, you want to get the search committee to say, oh, this person looks interesting, and through the cover letter you want them to read your vita. So your cover letter is your opportunity to sell yourself, promote your background as it relates to the needs of the particular position. There isn't a template cover letter where you write one and you use the same one for every job. There certainly might be things that you might say from employer A to employer B, but every cover letter that you write really needs to be thinking about that institution and why you might want to work for them and what you have to offer to this particular position. So again, it's a writing sample, and make sure that you're writing clearly and that you're proofreading your work over and over again. Don't just rely on spell check. It doesn't always pick up things. As I mentioned, tailor each one. 1.5 to 2 pages might be 1 page, but 2 pages at most. And make sure you address it to a specific individual. A lot of times you'll see search committee. Typically it will say the search committee chair. It's good to, if you don't have the name of the search committee chair, to make a phone call to find out who that search committee chair is. If you can't, then just say, dear search committee members, rather than to whom it may concern. Always think about the personal, going that extra mile to make sure that you're looking professional. I received a cover letter recently from somebody for a professional position in my office, and there was no business format, and didn't have any inside address or anything like that, and the person just started out, Dear Nancy, blah, 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 blah. Well, I don't know this person, and that's way too informal. It's dear, so-and-so, Mr., Ms., Doctor, whatever you see there. So, use business standard format. Again, if you have to submit it, a lot of these things you submit electronically. And I know with the institution, for example, and Dara, you've had more experience with the online system that people have to apply for faculty jobs here through HR. Can you submit a cover letter, like a Word document that you haven't used?
Yeah.
Okay, because sometimes some institutions, when they're using some electronic systems to manage, it's harder to do a cover letter the way we would like to do a cover letter. So in those instances, you have to follow whatever the protocol is. But in general, you would send a resume, a vita, and a cover letter electronically, perhaps as a PDF. But really make sure that you're being really careful in terms of how you're addressing the person. One of the things that's really hard with a cover letter is not to start every sentence with I. And, don't worry about that for your first draft, but then when you go back to critique yourself and proofread it, see how it sounds. Oh, and the last thing, don't use university letterhead. You're applying as a person, this is your personal application. You are not representing Binghamton University when you apply for a job. And I've seen people that have made that mistake. So don't use institutional letterhead when you apply for a job. Okay. Read the position notice carefully. I usually tell people, and again, how much the detail is going to be there is going to vary. You might have a really nice description, but take a highlighter and highlight the words that either tell you about the organization and what kind of organization they are. Highlight the words about, the qualifications that they're looking for, the research kinds of areas, whatever it is. But take a real careful look at that and go and take a look at the institution's websites and or the department's websites. The more that you can show familiarity or say something about the institution and why this might be a place where you'd like to be, that's going to enhance you as a candidate. Don't just say things like your excellent reputation. That's just nothing. But, what is it about the department? What is it about what you know about the institution that draws you to them and would make you want to be part of that community? Okay? If you know somebody that works at the institution and the department, see if there's something that you can glean from chatting with them that might help you in preparing your cover letter. And, start to think about, all right, as I look at this position description and as I think about my goals and my background, what are the 3 things that I really want to try and make sure that I say in this letter? So that you can avoid rambling. Okay. The first paragraph of your cover letter is really the shortest one typically, where you really just talk about, what position you're applying for and how you heard about it. If you're applying at the recommendation of a person who drew this to their attention and it's somebody at the institution, it might not be a bad idea to say, I'm writing the recommendation of so-and-so who alerted me to the fact of this vacancy. Because, or if it's somebody that is not necessarily somebody at this institution, but someone that the person that you're writing to might know, using a name can be a good way to connect or introduce yourself to someone. So you might say, I'm writing the recommendation of so-and-so who alerted me to this opportunity, or if it's somebody that they've done research with or that certainly you're familiar with. It's not name dropping. It might be, this person that referred you to them might have told them about you, and it might, this is the person that I was waiting to hear from. So anytime that you can use that kind of a name, certainly use it. Make 1 or 2 things in the beginning of the first paragraph after you talk about, what you're applying for and why, and maybe 1 or 2 things about what draws you to this, and what is 1 or 2 things that are your primary attributes for being a strong candidate. And then as you write any paper, your opening paragraph is going to lead you into the second and third paragraphs where you really sell yourself and talk a little bit more beyond what's on your vita, where you talk a little bit more about what are the things that you've done that relate to the demands of this job, what are the things that you know that relate to the demands of this job, what are the things that you can bring to enhance what they're already doing. So it's really your chance to talk about both, strengths, qualifications. If it's depending on the type of institution, if it's research-based, you want to emphasize research. If it's a liberal arts teaching college, then obviously there's different things that you might want to emphasize. So you want to just filter what you're writing about based on what you know and what you're learning about the organization. By the end of the letter, you want them to be able to say, you know, this person sounds interesting, this person sounds committed to the field, this person sounds like somebody who we want to consider further. Okay, that's your goal, is to really get them engaged and get them interested in wanting more about you. Okay. If this is a teaching position and a big emphasis on teaching, you know, there's some things here that talk about what you might write about, you know, how you approach your teaching. What are some things that you feel that you have really contributed in the way of teaching in your department? Like we were talking about earlier. Sometimes they'll ask in the job description to talk about your teaching philosophy, or, you know, the pedagogies that you use. So think about, you know, I want to talk a little bit about what areas that I feel most comfortable teaching as it relates to this position. Everything is always as it relates to this position, as it relates to this institution. You know, think about what they say they want people to be teaching about, but you can maybe talk about what specialty areas and what you might bring, or what other courses you might be interested in developing, depending on their needs. Okay? When you talk about research, again, try not to write it in too technical terms. Certainly people with technical competencies and skills and the expertise will be reading this, but a lot of times committees are comprised of other people as well. So try to balance talking about the technical and putting it in layperson's terms as well. So it's not totally just going on and on. I mean, I feel bad when I critique curriculum vitas of a lot of you Watson students. I don't know what you're talking about. And I'll say, I'm not sure what you're talking about. It sounds good to me. But, you know, think about that someone else might be reading, and how can you speak about it in layperson's terms as well. Okay. And then in your final paragraph, that's when you talk about, you kind of are wrapping it up. That typically is not a long paragraph either. And this is where you really reiterate, restate your interest, let them know I can be reached at the, you know, these numbers, this email address. I'm going to be at such and such a convention, such and such a conference. You know, I will be available, or, you know, let them know how you can be available for a phone interview. A lot of times organizations are doing phone interviews before they do. How many of you have had a phone interview before? Yeah? What's that like? Harder? Yeah? How come? Why is it harder?
I speak with a young kid and they can't understand each other.
Can't understand each other? Yeah.
You cannot see their expression.
Yeah.
Their face expression, so you don't know what's going on.
Yeah. You know, because a lot of times committees, money is tight everywhere. I don't have to tell you that. And instead of just inviting people for a campus interview, you know, they use phone interviews all the time now to screen. And, you know, there's a lot that you can pick up during a phone interview. You know, have any of you interviewed someone by the phone? Have you been the interviewer and you interviewed anyone by phone? You know, it's you don't want somebody, you don't want to hear background noises. You know, you want the person's full attention. And if you ever, if someone calls you and you're not expecting a call, you've sent your resume, or your vita, and cover letter, and all of a sudden you get a phone call and they say, oh, we'd like to talk to you, and you're running out the door to teach a class, it's okay to say, first of all, thank you for calling. I'm really interested. I'm very happy that you're calling. I'm on my way to, you know, a class or teach. When can I call you back? Set up an appointment. Don't feel like, oh my God, just because they're calling, I better talk to them or I'll never have a chance again. You know, but the first thing you want to say is, I appreciate hearing from you. I really want to talk with you. And you could either offer a time that would work for you, or just say, you know, when can we set up another time to talk? But that, get prepared for telephone calls and telephone interviews as a first step in somebody wanting to talk to you. So this kind of highlights what to say at the end. Don't enclose a lot of extra materials. Here's my syllabus, here's my teaching evaluations. No. You can tell them you have information available should they wish to review it. But all you need to do is send what they ask for. Okay? And then, of course, you'll be willing to prepare. And when you close, you say, you put sincerely, and then you leave a space, and then type your name. And if you're going to mail it in, then you make sure you sign the name above it. Okay? But the typical closing is sincerely or, very truly yours or something like that. I would stay away from love, but sincerely, and then type your name, okay? So, that's what I had to say about cover letters. You have a cover letter sample, a handout there. If you didn't get a copy of that, you can get those on our website. But how are we doing for time? We're doing pretty good for time.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Wow, okay. What questions do you all have?
Like if we are applying electronically on the website of the company, so how are we going to address the people over there?